back to Ben's Machines. Today we have a new project to introduce. It's right over here. This is a Kubota B5100 tractor. It is a four-wheel drive tractor, manual, and it's powered by a diesel two-cylinder engine, non-turbo. So this tractor came into the garage because the tractor didn't run. So the tractor is more or less complete, but it doesn't really matter because the tractor didn't start. So I brought it into my garage and I've spent the last little while troubleshooting it or trying to diagnose what the problem is. So this video is going to just give a snapshot of the status of this tractor repair at this point, and I'm just going to cover some of the key points from the diagnosis to share with you. And depending on the decision that we make, whether we follow through with repairing, there may be some subsequent videos that will follow. But for now, let's take a closer look at the tractor over here. So we'll just have a look here. Down here, this is the manufacturer's plate. So it's a Kubota tractor. It's the B5100, and like we heard, or like what I said here, it is a diesel water-cooled 4-cycle 2-cylinder engine. The engine itself is Kubota's Z500-1A engine. What I've done over the course of the last couple of hours is I got a fresh battery. I put a battery on the tractor. We'll show you the fuel system side. So here's the fuel tank. The diesel fuel comes into, essentially it's a fuel filter / water separator. There's an on-off valve. So with this valve in the on position, the fuel gets filtered. There's a filter canister inside. It then flows into a pump, a low pressure pump. The pump itself is driven off the engine, and then the fuel is then sent to the ignition pump. And here's the ignition pump right here. The ignition pump is also it's gear driven. And what that does is that it steps up the pressure of the fuel into two different outlets. So there's an outlet here and an outlet there, and then the pressurized fuel is then directed into injectors, and then the fuel is then introduced through the injectors into the combustion chamber. What I've done so far was I confirmed that there was good diesel fuel flow from the tank to the filter, from the filter to the low pressure pump or the gear pump, and then to the injector pump. And then I also confirmed that the fuel was going to the injectors, and I did a very crude test to check that the injectors were operating properly. And how I did that is I basically relied on the injector pump. I just reversed the lines. So rather than the lines coming up, oh here, let me just show you. These are the fuel delivery lines. So when the engine is assembled, these lines are installed like this. The high pressure diesel fluid is then directed through these lines into the injectors. So what I did is I took these lines and I reversed them this way. And then I screwed in the injectors here and here, and I cycled the motor. And what I was able to find out from this crude test, and I'm saying it's crude, it's not it's not a definitive flow test or pop test of injectors, but it gave me a good indication that the injectors were operating well enough that they were able to inject fuel into the combustion chamber. So after doing that test, I was able to confirm that there is fuel being delivered to the combustion chamber, but even with that said, the engine would not run. So that essentially told me that, you know, that we're probably not dealing with an issue with fuel. So I'll tell you what I did next. So let's go over to the workbench. Okay, so here we are back at the workbench, and here's the head. This is the head of the engine right here. So this is the underside. This is the portion or the underside of the head where the combustion chamber is for both cylinder number 1 and cylinder number 2. So what I will do is I'll just rotate this way. Okay. So this is the exhaust side of the head, and on this side is the intake side, or the air comes in this side. So I'll turn this around this way. Okay, so this is the location where the injectors are screwed into the head. So here and here. And for those who are not familiar with an injector, this is an example of an injector right here. And these are threaded into the head like this. So there's one here and there's one here. Now in these locations right here where I'm pointing with my screwdriver or my pointer, these are the locations where these items are threaded in, and these are the preheaters or the glow plugs, and they're threaded in like this. And the purpose of these is that there's a 12-volt current that gets applied to these glow plugs. When you apply electricity to this, it creates resistance in the metal, and it ends up heating up the tip of this item right here. And what that does is that aids in the ignition of the fuel or the diesel and air mixture inside the combustion chamber. So because this is a diesel engine, there's no spark plugs. Instead, you have diesel injected under pressure. It's more or less atomized, or it's injected in a nice pattern. It then combines with air, which is then compressed by the piston as it's coming up. That compression, or because diesel relies on high compression, that compressed air creates heat, and that combination auto ignites the fuel air mixture, and that creates the explosion, and it pushes the piston down, thus creating power and turning the crankshaft and then making power. So I'm describing all this because the next test was performed, and I'm going to draw your attention to this over here. So this is my diesel compression test set, and I'll open it up. So why I'm introducing this, or I'm talking about this, is that this is equipment that I use in my garage that I use to measure the amount of pressure that's built up inside an engine. So because this is a diesel engine, the diesel engines typically require high compression in order to create that combustion and the cycling of the piston up and down. Therefore, if I don't have suitable compression in here, then the engine or that combustion cycle won't occur. So what I did is that I used my gauge. This test setup I have here is for diesel engines, and I can test up to 1,000 psi. So what I did is I used my kit. I found a fitting. So I grabbed a specific fitting from my set and I threaded it into one of the ports where the glow plugs were. So I removed the glow plug, I threaded this in, my injectors were still in place, all this was still on the engine, and I cycled the engine over multiple times and I recorded the pressure in the cylinder on my gauge. So this essentially goes like this. So you connect that and you turn the engine over, and as the piston goes up and down, this, in a perfect world, this engine should be generating approximately about 450 psi per cylinder. In our case, or in my case, the maximum pressure that I saw in this cylinder was 150. And then worse of all, when I repeated this test over on this cylinder, so the cylinder on the far back, and when I ran this test, the highest pressure I was able to record off my gauge was about 20 psi. So what that tells me is that the engine, something has failed inside the engine, which is resulting in the lack of the adequate pressure buildup in the combustion chamber. So because of that, I decided to remove the head. So I've taken the head off. Here are the other parts over here of the engine. You know, the valve covers here, the radiator hose here. The one radiator hose is here. I've got the intake here and some other miscellaneous parts, and the nuts and bolts are here. So now let's go and see what's going on with the bore of the engine. So here we are now at the top of the engine. So the head bolts on to this surface right here. Here is one piston, and here's the other piston. And I can rotate the engine up and down just by hand by turning the bottom crankshaft here. So the problem with this can be seen right here, and I'm using my pointer and my trouble light. There seems to be some damage on the piston in this location here, and there's a couple of other nicks right here on the rear piston. On the front piston, there doesn't appear to be any problems with the piston itself, but I'm not sure if this is going to get picked up on the camera, but this engine block relies on a sleeve. So there's a sleeve that's inserted in here, and if you look down on the side, you may be able to see the marks in the sleeve right here. There's damage right here in the sleeve. In a perfect world, the sleeve should be perfectly smooth, but there's grooves right up here along the top on the front piston, and the same with the rear piston right here. There's just all these really deep scratches right up here and right over here as well. Here's another view right here. I'm just using my pointer to kind of identify the area. So these deep scratches here, what's happening is once the piston is coming up, once the piston comes up and starts pressurizing that air, as soon as it starts to get to this area where there's these deep scratches, the air is essentially blowing by the piston and through the rings, and it's essentially depressurizing the cylinder. And there's no amount of fuel that you can inject into the engine that will make this engine run if there's no compressed air inside. So where we are right now with this engine is that we've been able to show you where I think the problem exists with this engine. In order to fix this engine so that this tractor can be used again, I think what would be needed is pistons, rings, and a new sleeve and a new head gasket. So those are the things that are needed at a minimum. And maybe we'll go over here and I'll just show you the other parts that were on the tractor here. So this is the hood of the tractor. So again, it's a 4-wheel drive B5100. Here's the muffler for it right here. The muffler was in pretty good shape, you know, like depending on what I end up doing with this tractor, maybe I'll just end up repainting this, but this is in good shape. The hood itself is in good shape. There's no dents or anything. The grill is in good shape. Here's the radiator for the tractor. There's a bit of a problem with that. The top tank of the radiator is leaking. So once coolant is about this high in the radiator, there's a leak over in this location, and you know the liquid ends up flowing out. So if I was to rebuild this tractor, I'd have to get that tank looked after, and maybe, you know, it could be as simple as doing a recore or resoldering the tank onto the core after the core gets fixed. So I'll cover that at a later date. Over here with the tractor, I'm going to leave the tractor the way it is right now. I'll make a decision on what I'm going to do, if I'm going to pursue on rebuilding this. This tractor has a lot of potential. It's in really good shape. It's mechanically, you know, not including the engine, but everything else is in really good condition. So I think that there's still a lot of value, or there's still a lot of time left in this tractor after, you know, once the engine gets repaired. I'm going to call this video an end right here, but I wanted to introduce this tractor to everyone on YouTube because I wanted to create a reference for this particular engine, this Kubota Z500 engine. If I do proceed with changing the pistons and the sleeve, I'll create a subsequent video for that to document those steps. So with that said, thank you for joining us. Thank you to all of my new subscribers, and thank you for those that continue supporting us. Until then, we'll see you next time.